Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of our live event series on inclusion and diversity in geoprofession. I'm your host, Menzer Pehlivan. I'm a geotechnical engineer based in Seattle with Jacobs Engineering Group, which is a global technology and solutions company. I am the Northwest Tunnel and Ground Engineering Group leader, also serving as the executive advisor to the Global Solutions and Technology Director. Inclusion and diversity is really dear to my heart. I am the founding chair and the past president of the ASCE Geo-Institute Outreach and Engagement Committee. And also at Jacobs, I am the global co-chair of One World Employee Network, which focuses on cultural inclusion and diversity with a goal of enhancing cultural intelligence and helping our members become global citizens. Today, I'm very excited to have Amber Spears as my guest to talk about inclusion and diversity in geoprofession, a topic on which I know she's very passionate about. A little bit background about Amber. Amber is a project engineer with CTI Associates, a minority-owned environmental remediation engineering construction firm headquartered in Novi, Michigan, where she is an engineering in training. Amber served on planning committee for ASCE's 2020 multi-regional leadership conference for the Central Region, which was held in Michigan, where she also received the Outstanding Practitioner Advisor Award for her role as University of Michigan liaison for the ASCE Southeast Michigan branch Younger Members Group. I think you served on that role between 2016 to 2019.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Amber also served on the Technical Professionals Conference Planning Committee for National Society of Black Engineers, NASB, and in 2019 National Convention, and as the 2017 to 2018 Community Outreach Chair for NASB Detroit Professional Chapter. Mm-hmm. In addition to all those, in 2017, Amber received the Outstanding Leadership Award from the Engineering Society of Detroit, a local organization in which NASB is an affiliate. Amber is currently also serving as an adjunct faculty member at Lawrence Technology University. In addition to that, she's studying for professional engineering license exam in geotechnical engineering. Yes. But I will just give a quick shout out to all the EIT's engineers who will be taking the professional engineering exam tomorrow. So we are wishing you a very good luck. You will do great.
Good luck to you all.
Yeah. But before I turn it to Amber, I want to just add like a personal touch on like how I know Amber.
Yes.
We met when I was doing my PhD and she was doing her master's at the University of Texas at Austin. So if you remember, my first guest, Jean-Louis Briot, was also from Texas, but he's actually an Aggie. He's from Texas A&M University. So it was only right for me to have a Longhorn as my second guest. Yeah. So I realized we might have started these live inclusion and diversity series a little bit biased on the Texas side, but hey, you know what they say. You can take a girl out of Texas, but you can't take the Texas out of the girl. So like that is my justification. With no further ado, welcome Amber. Great to have you join me.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you taking the time with us. So let's get started with very basics. So what does inclusion and diversity mean to you and why it is important?
To me, inclusion and diversity means a lot. At a very young age, I was exposed to programs that were centered around increasing the number of minorities in STEM fields. DAPSEP specifically, which is the Detroit Area Pre-College Engineering Program, which has been in existence for, I believe, over 50 years. Was a program that I got involved in through my middle school science teacher. And from there, I noticed that there was something that I could basically lean on to help me navigate that path. But that was also kind of like my first time ever really learning about engineering, period. So without these types of programs throughout the pipeline, not just at the university level, there's no way that we can continue to grow the numbers and reach our 2025 goal of 50K engineers. Right now, we're at like 30,000 minority engineers out of 93,000 who are graduating annually. And I know that the 50K coalition, in which ASCE is involved in, has a goal of graduating 50,000 minority engineers annually. And then after they graduate, they have to have jobs, and they have to have jobs where they're welcomed and their ideas are welcomed, and they're not the only one. And they have a voice in basically the policies and the programs there. So inclusion and diversity is basically my entire existence in STEM. So, yeah.
Well, that's a great answer. So I will go back to the initial portion of your answer, actually. So like having STEM, and you mentioned something that is very important, having STEM education available for diverse pool of candidates at a young age, right? So you were lucky to have the science teacher to like really encourage you to go into the STEM field, which you are an engineer now. Yes. Congratulations to that science teacher. We need more of her.
Dr. Simmons, yes, thank you.
Yeah. So, but I'm curious, like, when did you know you wanted to go into the civil engineering? So there are different types of engineering, right? And traditionally, civil engineering might be, especially a couple years back, not anymore. Like now people see us, right? But like traditionally more male-driven field. So like, how were you encouraged or inspired, or who made you make that choice?
So when I was involved in engineering originally, civil engineering wasn't on my radar. And my sophomore year of high school, I took geometry, and I expressed to my teacher at the time, Mr. Barina, that I enjoyed geometry, and he told me that I should be a civil engineer. And I was thinking, what does that have anything to do with me telling you that I'm interested in geometry? And he's like, well, I'm a civil engineer. And I was like, oh, okay. So that planted a little seed. And then I continued to participate in programs, the Summer Engineering Academy at the University of Michigan's College of Engineering. Those were summer programs in high school. And I remember just constantly going to these different programs and thinking in my mind, if I had to choose a type of engineering, what would it be? And at that time, it was civil and environmental engineering. So I used the information that he gave me to put civil on the radar, but environmental was more so on my radar before that.
That is very interesting, because I have a totally opposing story of my high school when I said to the teacher that I want to.
You don't look like women don't go in the field.
The first impression he has just like, Menzer, let's rethink that. Like, why do you want to be an engineer? And this is really important to really showcase like how important those, it might be just one comment, right? Like it is the comment in like the million different things that they say every day or you hear every day, but it starts with, it gets stuck in your brain and sticks with you. So it's very interesting. It's really important how careful we are in the way that we message what is expected and like how we can really overcome those stereotypes. So another kudos to another teacher of yours. So like I think this is really showing like how important teachers play in our lives, right? Yes. So being a Black female engineer, I want to like go back to the point where like how easy was it to take that, you know, you answer it in a more like the gender specific point, but like being also like the woman of color, like how easy or not easy for you to get into this industry? And was there anyone, like, because we know that the role models are really important in terms of like, you know, you can aspire to be like someone. Was there someone like you within the engineering field or civil engineering field?
Yes, that's a very good question. And again, I'm sorry that your teacher discouraged you, because you are amazing and you look flawless while you do it. So I think, you know, that was the best decision that you ever made, to not listen to that instructor. So for me in college, Dr. Avery DeMond She was my fluid mechanics instructor, and she was the first woman of color, and she's actually Black Irish, who basically encouraged me, you know, the many times that I was in her office hours and working on different homework assignments and things of that nature. She took some time to tell me that she was Black Irish, because I didn't know, and also to acknowledge the fact that she noticed that I was working just as hard in my studies as I was in trying to make the campus at the University of Michigan more inclusive, more diverse, and increase the number of Black culturally responsible engineers, as well as other students on campus. And so I spent a lot of time in undergrad basically trying to do what others had done for me. Yeah.
Actually, can you a little bit elaborate on that? Why it was important for you, one, to make the space better for the others? Like, why was it important to spend your time, volunteer your time, to make Michigan, like the University of Michigan campus, more inclusive, and like what it really meant when somebody else was recognizing your efforts, and if your efforts were not to be recognized at the time, how would that, you think, would affect?
Very good questions. Yes, my involvement at the University of Michigan as an undergraduate student was simply a reflection of what I had been given. It was once said, to whom much is given, much is requested or required. And I took that to heart, and I tried to pay back a small bit of what I had been given. And so that meant that I was going to Adams Elementary in Ypsilanti, Michigan, to work with they had a STEM club there, and it was a STEM elementary school, to work with them once a week on engineering projects. And that means that I was working with the College of Engineering Office of Undergraduate Recruitment to do programs such as the Alternative Spring Break. And I actually founded that Alternative Spring Break group, co-founded it with the Office of Undergraduate Recruitment, which was a group that took students from the College of Engineering and took them to Chicago, and during spring break, and did different projects with the students in Chicago as a way for them to consider engineering, and also consider engineering at the University of Michigan. And that program has been in existence for, I believe, 10 years now. And one of my mentees at the time, Trebecca McDonald, took that program on. She was one of the only freshmen who went on the first one for Alternative Spring Break. And then following that, she took that program on for about 4 or 5 years while she was in undergrad, and took it to higher heights. And that program is still in existence to this day. So that's an example of like the impact and the legacy that really is expected of Black engineers in undergrad. And we go in knowing that, you know, we have to do what other people did for us.
Right. And that's a fantastic story. I'm so glad I asked the question, Amber, because I didn't know about this. And I'm assuming all the listeners now know why I think you are spectacular. So this is amazing.
Thank you.
That will take me to another question. So, and you know, having not many role models and being hard on ourselves, especially, I know it's being a female. I don't know if you will consider me as woman of color or not. Like, depends.
Yes, you are a woman of color.
Depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
But imposter syndrome is a real issue for most of us. I know it is for me. And coming from the, you know, like a more minority background, it can act even more dramatically on somebody else. So can you tell us about, because I think it is important to share like the vulnerabilities that we have to really share our stories. Can you talk to us about how, if you experience the imposter syndrome, or like what things that you do to help overcome it, but also Have you experienced any difficulties in the profession or while your studies, or like just because you think that you were not as good as the person next to you, which not necessarily was true?
Yes, imposter syndrome is real in the communities of color, Black, Indigenous, and people of color from around the world. We definitely experience imposter syndrome. For me, I came from a predominantly Black city where my high school and my middle school and my elementary school were all predominantly African Americans. And then I came to an institution, the University of Michigan, where we were about less than 4%. And then also at the University of Texas at Austin, we were less than 4%. And that's for Blacks. The number was slightly higher for, including all people of color. So I experienced imposter syndrome, and I had basically a moment where I was considering dropping out of civil engineering in my junior year because my grades plummeted after basically I had 4 classes, just engineering. I had completed all my prereqs and, my introductory courses for civil engineering, and I was just in 4 civil engineering classes. I was in leadership positions within various organizations on campus. So I was like at my peak, but my grades were suffering because it was hard balancing everything. And even though I was still maintaining my studying and maintaining like going to office hours and things of that nature, the material was harder. It was simply harder. So I was definitely like doubting myself. And eventually I did overcome that. My family, leaning on my family, them telling me like, well, just don't quit. But then obviously the support of those social organizations on campus and my resources on campus and several of the faculty in the civil and engineering department pushed me further. And then I had another moment when I was in grad school for the first time in my life. I was on academic probation because I got a 2.9, and that was my second semester of my first year of my master's degree program. And I took it with a grain of salt because I also took my FE exam that semester and I passed it, and I was very happy about that. But it kind of stressed me out. And so actually Dr. El-Matar was helpful in advising me on my next steps in that situation because he was my graduate advisor, and he recommended that I take summer courses as well as do research. And so by the fall semester of my second year, I received my letter that I was no longer on academic probation, and I was relieved because that was the first time that was the furthest that I had ever been away from home. And I really felt like, man, this would be a waste because I really know no one here, no one, I have no family in Texas, and I'm here solely for my education. So that was definitely a blow to my self-esteem, but I pushed through. There were several other times, considering that I've been to several career fairs and I've never received a job from any career fair. This is from national conferences that I go to in organizations. This is from the esteemed career fairs that are at these institutions that I attended, including one that I even helped plan, and I never received a job. And I don't know to this day why that was the case, but I was very thankful that my mentor, Miss Carolyn Buckles of Onyx Enterprises, was instrumental in making sure that I had an internship the summer after my sophomore year of college, which turned into my first full-time job because I also could not get any offers for a full-time job when I graduated from UT. So there are a bunch of instances. That's just a handful.
Right. And just want to add, I might know a thing or two about being really away from home, just maybe one or two.
Oh, so. Yeah, all the way from Turkey. I definitely understand.
Just one or two. So thank you so much for sharing and being vulnerable about these topics. What I want to ask you is what others can do to support minorities, our African American, Black women engineers within their company, within their, industry, within their organization, within their school, within their class, wherever. So what would have been helpful to you, or like what was helpful to you that I know you mentioned Professor El Muhtar, who's a really good friend of mine. Say hi, Shadi. But what else can we do to better support the Black engineers that we have in our communities?
Yes,
not just engineers.
Yes, very good question. Not just engineers. So I'm a member of Black Lives Matter Detroit chapter. And since about 2014, I've been trained by the leaders of Black Lives Matter on issues and things in our community. In 2014, I also went to Ferguson, Missouri to protest the killing of Mike Brown, who had his hands up when he was killed by the police. And he was had just graduated from high school. And I'm generally very active in my community, my church, different things of that nature. And I think that you do have to not just look at supporting Black students who want to go into civil engineering or who want to go into STEM. You have to look at the Black community as a whole. And I think that just by uplifting these organizations and acknowledging the work that they do, this very hard work of dismantling white supremacy and saying Black Lives Matter, just saying Black Lives Matter. For some people, they have to say all lives matter. You don't need to say all lives matter. That is a rebuttal. We're not arguing anything. We are saying Black Lives Matter. So I think that we need to continue to uplift organizations like Black Lives Matter, because there are several organizations that are doing this important work, and continue to listen to the Black people who are in your communities and circles. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to tell people, hey, I'm really experienced in helping with recruiting minority talent. I'm really passionate about it. That was one of my reasons for becoming an adjunct faculty member, wanting to give back to students and give them an example like me, so they can have that in their reference point. So yes, there are definitely a lot of things that we can do, but I definitely think that it has to be for Black people as a whole, not just those who want to go into STEM.
So going into Black Lives Matter, as you mentioned, it got the national attention after the murder of Trayvon Martin in 2012. Yes. There was an international resurgence after the murder of George Floyd in 2020.
Yes.
That really helped us prioritize equity, inclusion, equality for Blacks in many spheres where previously there was not. So as a Black woman, in our geotechnical profession, if we bring it back to our geotechnical profession, can you speak to your experience with that? And we can also talk about the civil engineering profession, but I also want to get your opinion about the geo profession as itself. So, and maybe you can comment on if there are any improvements or attempts of improvements that has happened after maybe these 2020 events or the Black Lives Matter movement getting more resurgence. So within the engineering field, I know as for my company, we do have an action plan we set out this summer, which I'm very proud of, to really help elevate Black participation in our company and like bring them to the leadership and like to really provide the equity. But I want to really hear what you think or what you're seeing. Are there any improvements?
So thank you. I did read Jacob's plan, and I really liked it. And it sounded like it didn't come from the top down. It sounded like they listened to a lot of the feedback that they may have received. And it was specific measurable goals and not just some superfluous, we want to help the community the best way we can. There were measurable elements to the plan. So I think that definitely something that is specific and measurable needs to be implemented, and something that can be reported because I know that, for example, with universities, they have these reports, these annual reports where they can say, you know, what the numbers are when in terms of their diversity in faculty, their diversity in undergraduate students and graduate students. But at companies, typically you don't get to see that type of report. But there is, that information is being submitted to, I believe, like the Equal Opportunity Office, like the federal.
Yes.
Yeah, so that information is being submitted, but it's not available. So I personally would like to see those types of reports, because for me, it's really important, and it really impacts my like community culture or work culture. Really impacts whether I can see myself somewhere beyond just the years that I'm working now. So if I don't see myself at a company, then I'm probably not planning on retiring from that company. And that's simple. It should be simple. But I think that for some people it's not. So within my 6 years as a professional, my 2 years of graduate school and 4 years of undergrad, there have been several instances where I felt like a token. And there have been several instances where I felt like people treated me like I was an exception to Black people. And I am not an exception. There are several people who can do what I do just as good, who look like me. And I think that that needs to be well represented throughout geotechnical engineering. Yeah.
I'm actually going to interrupt you over there, because what you're saying is really important. And we talked a little bit about, like, you asked me why we call this inclusion and diversity series rather than diversity and inclusion. And this is exactly the reason why I wanted to call it inclusion and diversity series, because we can report the diversity in the numbers and in metrics, but sometimes you might be treated as a token. And like, really, if we are not including everyone and providing them not just a seat, but also a voice on the table, then diversity does not really bring the benefit or really matter. So I'm so glad that you actually brought that up, because I wanted to talk to you about that. We said we would mention this one.
Yes.
So I really appreciate that. I wanted to remind our listeners that you can ask your questions on the live session, and I will direct them to Amber. So one of the questions that came through is really related to, and like, this is talking about the token, right? And it is from a good friend of both of ours, from Hande Gerkush. And she's asking, what was it like for you to be in Texas in the South and as a woman of color? So how was that experience?
Okay, so that's a good question. One of the first, I guess, clues into what type of experience it was going to be was when I told my godfather actually that I was going to Texas, and I was like, "Are you going to visit me?" And he told me that George Bush was from Texas, and I said, "What does that have to do with me going to Texas for grad school?" But yeah, Texas was one of those places in my mind where I didn't think would be diverse, but thankfully Austin was diverse. And really, I can't think of any specific instance while being in Austin where I felt like I was being attacked. I mean, you recognize microaggressions, you know, but you can live, or you are desensitized almost to microaggressions. You expect that. But I did not see anything really overt. But the thing that was big and looming was the Fisher versus University of Texas case. For the undergraduate students at the University of Texas, where there was actually a lawsuit being said, basically where a student was saying that the reason why they did not get accepted to the University of Texas at Austin was because of the, I believe, the top 10% rule that they have there, where they automatically accept the top 10% of the graduates from all the high schools in Texas. And so there was a student basically who said that were it not for that rule, they would have gotten accepted. So like I felt that on campus, like that type of tension. But as a graduate student, I also recognized that it was slightly not it was not really me who was the person who was getting that type of attack. So supporting those students on campus. And I definitely heard stories of, people facing discrimination, housing discrimination. At UT Austin, it's really hard to find housing on campus that's actually student housing. And there are so many like expensive apartments that are close to campus. So students finding housing on campus and being student housing is really, really hard. So I just remember, the busing system. I was on the committee for busing, I believe. I can't remember the exact committee.
I didn't even know there was a committee for busing. So
yes, it was the graduate student assembly. They had a committee for that. So I remember because I took the bus and I actually biked and bused to campus a lot. And basically I was on that committee they were planning on restructuring the bus routes and stuff like that. And they were trying to figure out which ones were the most critical and which ones can they merge so they can remove some of the stops. And that's like transportation engineering. I never had a transportation engineering course, and I regret that to the fullest, especially because the PE required you to answer questions about transportation engineering. But just that alone was like, a factor of it. So.
Yep, I hear you. So I have another question actually. So like let's take it back to where you work now. You're working for a minority-owned company, and why is it important for you, or is it important for you to work for a minority-owned company? And like how do you see can you comment on the roles that like the minority-owned companies play within our industry?
Yes. When I first found out about this company, CTI and Associates, it was through my mentor again, Miss Carolyn Buckles. I was basically trying to figure out what would be my next move. And she told me about this company that I had heard nothing about. So I reached out and found out that I was very interested in it. And we have we're very large in the industry of solid waste. So like Geo-Syntech is very involved in like solid waste and geosynthetics and things of that nature. Being at CTI and Associates and having the capabilities that we have has really been an eye-opener to me, because it's inspiring to see that, minority-owned firm can have a voice in some of the leading industry topics. My mentor also owns her own business, and it's WBE, and she's also a Black woman, and she's a structural engineer. Mm-hmm. And I think that knowing her is really what made me focus more on being selective about the type of companies I even apply to, because in graduate school, it's like whoever gives me the offer, whoever pays me the most, like that's what I want to do. I mean, of course, you go to the, if you get the chance to go to the office and get a feel for it, that plays a role. But on paper, that's pretty much what you're looking at. So once I knew about her and her role in making sure that minority-owned firms. She's the president of NAMC, which is the National Association of Minority, I believe, Consulting Engineers. I'm sorry if I messed that up. But yeah, so minority-owned companies, small businesses, women businesses, those are so important. They're not only important to geotechnical engineering, they're important to the economy. So I know that with the pandemic happening, that a lot of those businesses were, seeking grants, and oftentimes, the woman-owned business or the minority-owned business might be the last company to receive the grant even because the grants were open to everyone. And so like we even have to look at that. So I think that we definitely need to make those businesses thrive.
There are great questions coming up. So like I'm going to ask you another question, which is going to tie back to the employers. So what do you think the employers can do to increase diversity? The question asks increase diversity, but I will say inclusion and diversity of their team. So like making diverse is one thing, making it inclusive and diverse is another. And what can a company, whether it's a geotechnical company or a general consultancy company, do to be an attractive option for the Black engineers or like the women of color or minorities? So what do you think? What would really make a company attractive for you to say that I want to work here, I see a future here for myself?
Yeah, so when you look at the minorities who are working at that company already, you kind of almost want to interview them before you get to make that decision to see like what it's really like. Or you hope that when you go in for your interview that somehow one of them will be, on the lunch trip or whatever the case may be. So companies should really start with the minorities that they have already and get honest feedback from those minorities and ask them, what has your experience been at working for this company in terms of inclusion and diversity specifically? That even includes salary. A lot of times companies, they have a set salary. In Michigan, it's actually, you can share with your new employer what your previous salary was at the former company. But if you were not satisfied with your salary at the former company, why should that even be factored in to your salary at your new employer? So I know in California, it's illegal to ask about the previous salary. So I think that you definitely need honest feedback from the current employees that you have. And then to make it more attractive, you can create programs. I know that there are a lot of affinity groups in larger companies. They might have like, a Black network or whatever the case may be within the company. And for smaller companies, that may not be possible, but there should be some level of acknowledgement of, we are training our employees to not have implicit bias. We are training our leadership to be anti-racist, which means to actively work against racist and systemically racist issues and things of that nature.
Right. So I actually want to dive a little bit deeper into your work in your company and what you do. And I will start with a little bit surprise. I was sharing with one of my colleagues here at Jacobs that I was super excited to be talking to you for this live event. And his name is Mike Eller, small geotechnical world. Turns out he actually worked with you on a job site where you were the field coordinator a couple of years ago from this. It's like, and then he was there just for inspection. And he shared this basically memory of his with me that he felt really sorry because although you were in charge, people were to go to him and ask him for his opinion and like what needs to be done. And he was just like, no, I'm here just to inspect. I'm not doing anything. She is the person in charge, and he had to refer those others to you. Well, I've been out in the field. I experienced similar situations. Maybe you can start with that, like how those interactions go, and then tell us about really what you do and your daily work and how does that impact communities of color.
Okay, so first off, thank you for asking others about me. And it is a small world.
So I didn't ask. I was just excited. I said like, oh yeah, I'm going to be doing this. And then Mike said, oh, I know her. I'm just like, you do?
So I don't remember that instance specifically, but there are probably several of them in my experience. So I'm desensitized to it. But I do remember before I was ever leading anything, there was this one time I was actually harassed on site. I was doing concrete testing, and while I was doing it, someone who wasn't in a leadership position, one of the contractors, he wasn't the foreman, he wasn't any of that. He just came over to me, got very close to my personal box, and was like, "You're not doing that right." And I just looked like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "You're not doing that right, and I'm going to report you." So he starts videotaping me while I'm doing concrete testing. And, if the concrete test doesn't pass, you have to let them know so that they can, make improvements to it or whatever. And I can't even remember if it passed or not, but the simple fact that he was over my shoulder video recording me just gave me this, basically I was aggravated, and I was also like in fear because I'm like, I don't know you and you have no responsibility doing what you're doing. So I really don't know what you're going to do next. And so I reported that, and that was within my first, I would say my first 2 years of working, and I was a staff engineer. Other times, yes, when I'm, the person in charge at a site, sometimes you'll get backlash for the decisions that you make. And I think that people don't realize that everybody has to be an expert in what they do. Everybody has to stay in their lane. And so if I don't come to you and say, "You're not, drilling right," I can't tell you how to use your equipment for the drill rig. But I can tell you if we need to go 10 feet deeper because we didn't get what we were supposed to get and we're looking for this. So let's go 10 feet deeper. Things of that nature. I can't really pinpoint if it's, been the same thing every time, or, just the order of how things go. Like maybe we were planning to drill at this place, and now we're going to go over here and drill instead because we don't need to do this place anymore. Things are always changing in the field. But one thing that I do at sites, health and safety is of most importance. And so if you're annoyed because I tell you to wear safety glasses and a vest, like, get over it. I don't care. And everybody has stop work authority. So that's one thing that I make clear as well. So if you think that something is unsafe, either that I'm doing and it's impacting your work, or something that you're doing and it's impacting my work, everybody has the right to stop work at that time and voice what's wrong. So if I'm empowering you to make sure that the site is safe, like, I really have your best interest at heart already. So you should really be happy and, cooperate.
Right. And I know how difficult that might be at some point, especially when it's coming from a woman. I'll end it there.
Yes.
So, but I still want to learn a little bit more about Amber. What do you do as a geotechnical engineer? So what do you work on? Like, can you tell us maybe 1 or 2 projects that you're working on right now?
Sure. So yes, as a project engineer, that's a recent transition within about a year or so. And I've been working on we got a really cool federal project where we'll be doing we're planning some investigations to look at the subsidence at a landfill and determine what's causing the subsidence. And it's a contaminated site. And so we're doing stuff in the geotechnical realm, but there's another aspect of our team that's doing stuff in the environmental realm. And so we're going to be able to do quite a few tests there, some LiDAR testing. We're going to be doing some drilling. We're going to look at the gas emissions and try to pinpoint locations where the cap may have failed, or other aspects where we can improve, like, the function of the landfill and also like the storm water collection component of the landfill. And other projects that I'm working on, we have one of our largest clients, CTI is one of CTI's largest clients. We do a lot of work for them, and I've been very fortunate to be able to do like both field work and come back and actually see the entire project through. So working on like some CPT investigations there, when we're trying to determine like the characteristics of the waste in like a certified closed area of the landfill. I've assisted with installing piezometers in a landfill so we can understand more about the pore pressures and the soft clay underneath the site. So those are just, I guess, 2 examples of some projects that I've worked on.
That was a nerd in me. I had to ask those questions. If it is a little too technical for some of our listeners, I apologize for that. Like, it's more like a sorry not sorry condition in this case. But let's continue with one of the questions that came from the listeners. So the question is, how would you advise a first-year Black student who's struggling with course like physics and an introduction to engineering?
Oh man, that's a really good question. Physics was one of those courses that I started with a bunch of my friends, and then by the end of that semester, you know, a lot of my friends had chosen to leave the class. And I also was in the comprehensive studies program for the physics, which basically consisted of like an extra, there were more discussion sections of that than there were of the regular course. And in high school, I took AP Physics. And so even though I didn't pass the AP exam, I still considered myself to be, you know, exposed to, you know, physics well, but I was encouraged to take CSP, which is the Comprehensive Studies program. And the professor who was the discussion leader was very passionate about, you know, students passing. And so I think that, you know, if you're taking a physics course right now and you don't feel like you're grasping the concepts and you're not seeing improvement in your discussion sections that's, you know, correlating with the exams, then I would tell you to, you know, not take the course, not finish the course. It worked out for a lot of my friends. They, you know, ended up retaking it. I took physics electromagnetism at a local community college. And even there, it was difficult. It was challenging. Electricity and thermodynamics and all of those concepts, I still am not very confident in right now. So I think, you know, don't be discouraged about, you know, your courses and intro to engineering. Sometimes that might mean computer programming for some people, and physics. You basically need to continue to be exposed to other engineering courses and plan to take the course when you when you're more mature and you have time that you can devote to studying, and also when professors who you really respond well to are teaching the course.
Yeah, there's only one thing that I'm going to add to that.
Okay.
Is, you know, just because you're struggling in physics doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to be a good engineer.
Yes.
It doesn't. It's
Absolutely.
just one course that you need to go through at one part of your life. It is really when you are, you know, 5 years into the career, nobody's going to come and ask that physics question to you. Do your best. Do your very best. And that's all you can really do, and move on. But that should not be a discouragement for you to really, if you really want to become an engineer, just because you didn't do well in this physics class does not mean that you're not going to be the one. So just continue on like what you want to become and like focus on that and take it one day at a time. That will be my advice.
I second that advice. That's a great addition.
We're getting close to our time here. Okay. I have one last question, 2 parts. What can be done, and this is the question that actually came through in the live session, what can be done to make sure everybody feels included? That is my first part. And the second part is like, what do you see as the biggest challenge in achieving inclusion and diversity in our engineering profession?
So I think that to make sure everyone feels included, they have to be represented, they have to be celebrated. A lot of times, different in the holidays, just as an example, the holidays that we celebrate nationally, a lot of those holidays mean different things to different people. And so while you may be celebrating Thanksgiving, an indigenous person may not be celebrating Thanksgiving for very good reasons. And so we need to acknowledge and uplift that. While you may be celebrating Independence Day, someone else may not be celebrating independence because they were not independent at that time. They were not free. So we need to acknowledge in the holidays, when we have flex holidays, really, the flex holidays, I usually choose Martin Luther King Jr. Day for one of my flex holidays, and I've tried to continue that as much as I can, because even though it's a federal holiday, I don't get like a paid vacation day for that day. So, thinking about the holidays that we celebrate within companies, thinking about whatever types of celebrations people do, acknowledging the differences in those type of celebrations. We have to acknowledge the LGBTQ community in the workplace. We often don't talk about gender and sexuality or the differences, and we don't celebrate those either. So we have to lift up those communities. And I really think one of the hardest things that are blocking inclusion and diversity is just our failure to listen when people tell us that they've been harmed and the ways that it has impacted their life, and actually take your pride and move it aside, or move your offense. Like, you may represent an institution, you may represent a company, and that's fine, we get it, but you have to, not personalize and internalize it, and realize that, these are problems. If these are problems for someone, then these are problems for the entire company. Or the entire institution. So we have to listen to the feedback that we receive and not shun people for saying how they feel.
Sure. And I really like the fact that you tied it back to the cultural inclusion and diversity. That is I'm very passionate about, because really our culture, our backgrounds, ethnical, or the countries that we raised in, the cultures that we grow up in, really have significant influence on who we are. And we might look the same, but we might be totally interacting, communicating in many different ways, celebrating different holidays, and we need to be cognizant about those differences. So thank you so much, Amber, for joining me today. I really had a blast, and I really love talking to you about inclusion and diversity. Thank you for your passion on this area and for all you do.
Well, I have a question for you. One question: when is the next meeting for the Committee on Outreach and Engagement for Geo-Institute?
When is the next meeting?
Yes.
You mean
the committee on
so the Committee on Outreach and Engagement, we meet, so this is a board level committee, so we meet every month.
Oh, wow.
Internally, but we do have meetings. If you guys are interested in, you can send an email to me, and you can send an email to Stacy. We would love to get you engaged. Stacy Klesa is the new chair. She just started, so I'm off the hook. She's taking it over, but we would love to engage you guys. But we don't.
I'm going to email you. That was for me.
Yeah, we don't necessarily have open meetings that we are holding, but we are very happy to hear back the feedback and what we can do for the Geo-Institute. Well, with that, thank you again, Amber. And before we close, I'm excited to announce the next live session, which my guest this time will be Suzanne Lacasse, who I really look up to, and she is a legend, especially for the women in geo profession, for all of us to look out to. So that will be on November 18th. We will be sharing the announcement and link for that. Thank you again so much for tuning in and joining to our conversation. We will see you on November 18th.